Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. One of the biggest concerns in global manufacturing right now is a shortage of microchips, or more specifically, semiconductor chips. These chips are used in everything from cars to appliances. Supplies are extremely tight for a number of reasons. Ahead of the pandemic, some of the big chip makers started to shift to making more advanced chips for things like 5G. But when COVID hit, demand exploded for products using the older chips, products like computer monitors. Add into that the faster than expected economic recovery from the pandemic and a greater demand for cars, and the shortage is causing some major headaches around the world for vehicle manufacturers. And if all that wasn't enough, we're now facing a shortage of rubber as well. There's several reasons for that, from China stockpiling the resource through to increased demand for medical equipment. But it sure is hard to make cars without rubber for tyres. Malcolm Flynn is the editor of Carsguide. Malcolm, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here.
How are these shortages of semiconductor chips and rubber affecting the local automotive industry?
I'm not sure the rubber shortage has affected Australia just yet, but I expect it to. And be mindful that cars don't just use rubber for tyres, they need it for belts and hoses and seals that are used for everything that moves or opens and shuts. So right through the car from top to bottom. With the chip shortage, I know of at least one important new model that's already been delayed, with its arrival date now more of a TBC. This is affecting some of the biggest brands too, so bulk buying power isn't enough to help them overcome it. It's important to realise that these chips are also generally found all over the place in new cars, wherever there's an electric function really, so headlights, even the door handles in proximity cars. I expect supply issues well beyond these two types of components though. Modern cars are very complex, and things like raw materials for steel, glass for the windows, other electrical components including batteries for hybrid and electric cars are sourced from all corners of the globe. When you consider the fact that manufacturers operate with just-in-time logistics and don't tend to stockpile any of these elements, it's a very fragile situation that will be very difficult to maintain in this environment. It's not just delays that we need to prepare for, of course. Any shift in demand and supply will be sending pricing upwards too. And then a particular issue facing Australia is that we're a very small car market on the global scale, and generally have to wait in line behind bigger markets like China, the US and Europe for supply of new cars. So these bigger markets will continue to get priority long before Australia.
Okay, so have any of the car makers, not just locally, well, we don't have car makers locally, but have any of the big guys actually cut back production yet, or is it something that's coming?
I think it's fair to say everyone's adjusted their production schedules long ago, and I expect it to continue. Initially there was the issues with COVID and, workforces, and I'm sure they're still feeling it across Europe and the US and no doubt through Asia as well. But this part supply is sort of the next challenge to overcome.
Okay, so with companies like Bapcor and that, they own Autobarn and Midas, are those businesses being affected as well?
For sure, they all rely on the supply of complex parts and components, so they're bound to experience similar challenges. I'm no authority on the parts supply industry, but my sense is they're more likely to stockpile items, so the impact may be less than that of the new car industry, but I can't say for sure.
So during the pandemic, there were already supply chain issues affecting new vehicles coming into the country, and then we saw last year in Australia the price of second-hand cars rising. Where's all that up to at the moment? Is it still a good time to be selling a second-hand car?
Definitely, very much so. And seemingly across the spectrum of brands and price points. I heard of one example this week of an expensive premium model, which typically depreciates quickly once it's superseded, being sold at a significant profit over its purchase price. And I saw another example myself over the weekend of a 4-year-old small hatch, just a regular brand with over 100,000 kilometres on the odometer, which is being advertised for just a couple of $100 less than its new price. So its resale value has easily doubled within the last 12 months. So yes, if you own a car that's relatively new, that you find yourself not really needing, it seems like a very good time to sell it.
In your knowledge, Malcolm, has there ever been a time where used cars have sold for as much as they are at the moment?
It's hard to think of a time across the board. No, certainly not. You see situations where little pockets of this when manufacturers launch very desirable new models and, Australian demand far exceeds the supply that, the international manufacturer can meet. And people tend to flip cars for more than their purchase price. But I've never seen it across the board like this, no.
Yeah. And what about luxury cars? We did a story recently about more Porsches being sold in March than ever, or I think it was the second largest number than ever before. What's that part of the market like, the very top end of the market in terms of both new but resale particularly?
It's odd. And as I said before, there's the resale of near new and, just before models is surprisingly strong. And I think it's fair to say it will continue as long as the economic impact continues to be felt in certain industries while others flourish. There's certainly a net economic impact, but, some corners of the industry seem to be booming. So, along with brands like Mercedes-Benz and BMW, the likes of Ferrari and Lamborghini have managed to get through this unscathed so far. And those latter two blow my mind, considering they sell cars for price points in line with small residential properties, and they're just cars.
Yeah.
It's also amazing how this situation has caused the classic car market to boom too, with record numbers being seen at auctions of all types of desirable older cars. And it seems to have accelerated the nostalgia for Australian-built cars after the end of local manufacturing.
Stay with me, Malcolm. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Malcolm Flynn, the editor of Carsguide. What about the other end of the spectrum, which is electric vehicles? It seems that when I'm in a car and my kids see a Tesla, they all yell out, "There's a Tesla." So they're very popular, but in actual fact, the numbers don't bear out that Australians are buying electric vehicles anywhere near like they are in Europe and other parts of the world.
No, certainly. And, they're certainly available. We're now seeing most, if not all, of the major brands offering, and particularly the premium brands, offering electrified models. But, the take-up rate is just taking a while to kick off in Australia. And, a big part of that is Australia is lacking government incentives. And I think it needs to become a much bigger election issue to gain momentum. Without this intervention, we'll continue to love our cheap and convenient petrol and diesel cars for a long time yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point because I know the UK has incentivised people to have electric vehicles by 2030. Japan won't allow the sale of internal combustion engines in new cars after 2035. So there is a really big push, but the government here hasn't done anything like that, has it?
No, certainly not to the same degree. And, part of it is that we have, kind of a specific general usage requirement in that, we have a big, broad country that, requires a lot of us to travel big distances. And that tends to be the shortcoming of electrified vehicles at this stage, particularly pure electric vehicles, and throw in the fact that our, recharging infrastructure is minimal. It's expanding, but it's still minimal. And aside from it becoming sort of fashionable to aim for an electrified car in wealthy urban areas, there's still plenty of impediments to gaining serious momentum in Australia.
Okay. Distance, is that something that the car makers will eventually overcome, do you think?
Definitely, battery technology and motor technology, plus the fact that the most pure electric cars to date have been direct drive, so not through a transmission, unlike every other combustion engine vehicle that uses a transmission. Electric cars have been sort of prioritised for performance around town. And the moment you take them on the highway, the motor spins at highway speeds, therefore consuming electricity much faster. And that's compromised their sort of touring range. But another big thing the manufacturers have done of late is, it's actually been happening for a while, but it's really gaining momentum, is offering series hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles to sort of fill the gap in the meantime. So series hybrids, key example of that would be the Toyota Prius. And, Toyota's now spread that technology through most of its range. And, we're set to even have a series hybrid Land Cruiser in the near future. But plug-in hybrids mean that you can basically run around on electric-only charge for a while, and then there's a petrol engine or diesel engine also there to kick in when you run out of charge, so you can still drive Brisbane to Melbourne if you want to. But if you're driving to work, you can enjoy the EV life as well. So two great sort of stepping stones available right now in addition to the pure EV. So you can go electrified without going pure electric and not compromise your lifestyle at this stage.
You mentioned charging stations. How fast is the growth of charging stations? In fact, I've got you here, Malcolm, so I'm going to ask dumb questions about it. Who owns the charging stations, number one? And number two, I was in Queensland recently and people were charging their cars at a station near the beach there. How do you pay for it? Or are these really stupid questions?
No, not at all. No, so Tesla owns their charging network and, they still have the most extensive network in Australia. But third-party providers like ChargeFox are sort of pairing with a bunch of OEM brands to sort of accelerate the rollout of their charging network. But it's still, largely population density driven and demand driven. So you can't quite drive to Perth yet. It's a long way off actually. But generally can connect major cities on the East Coast.
So how do you actually pay for it? So is it like a normal petrol bowser where you go and you pay per time period or something like that? I don't even get the concept of how you refill the electricity in your car, so to speak?
Yeah, very good question. So the Tesla system recognises the car being plugged in, and you've got your Tesla account, and it charges automatically to your account as soon as you plug in. But the earlier charging stations required sort of membership to an organisation. And I don't think you'd need to do that across the board anymore. But generally, the more recent sort of charging stations, you just tap your card to pay. And, you know, the likes of the NRMA offer a charging service to members, and that's free for members. And their network's getting pretty significant in New South Wales. So there's a few ways to pay, to answer your question.
So when you look into your crystal ball, when do you think that electric vehicles will be commonplace on Australian roads?
Pure electric, I think it is likely to be decades until they're the predominant option in Australia. But I think, once again, the stepping stones of plug-in hybrid and series hybrid cars will grow in popularity significantly in the coming decade. And, you know, we're starting to see it now, and cost is still an impediment to a lot of people. You know, I was driving a Mercedes plug-in hybrid last week, and it's still an extra, I think it was $7,000 to go for the plug-in model, which in Mercedes world is not much, but when you can spend that $7,000 upgrading to leather seats instead, you know, it's still a bit of a tough sell.
Malcolm, thanks for talking to Fear and Greed.
Pleasure.
That was Malcolm Flynn, the editor of Carsguide, for the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every weekday morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast, the business news you need for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.